Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of you are familiar with the big rental agency Netflix, you're also familiar with one of their Emmy Award-winning shows, which is Orange is the New Black. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of the new book, Out of Orange, which is a memoir. It's Clary Walters joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today to talk about the real-life inspiration for the Karen Nora Jensen and Piper Kerman's memoir, and Alex Voss. And she's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today to share what actually was going on and what the reality is of what it is to spend 6 years in a Dublin, California prison before being paroled in 2008. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Clary Walters. Clary, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Now, writing, this must have been really something for you to start seeing sort of a life flash before your eyes, as you were saying in your book, when you seen the commercial for this television series, Orange is the New Black. Tell us what was going on for you there.
Well, when the first time I saw the commercial, I'd been out of prison for a couple of years, but I was still on probation, which means that your life is a house of cards, very easily toppled. And when you come out of the pokey, I think it's probably common that everyone lives with this very deep-seated paranoia that something's going to happen that is totally out of your control, and that no matter how well-behaved you are or how on time you are for every meeting you're supposed to be at and P-test and whatnot, that something will come and kick you in the butt that you can't control, that comes out of left field, and it's sort of like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. And so when this commercial came on, I was instantly convinced that the other shoe had just dropped, that my work would find out that I was this now infamous lesbian drug smuggler having sex in their living room, not just the little, check this box if you have a felony conviction. And I'd lose my job, and without a job, I would be violated, and, the whole thing would just come tumbling down.
That doesn't sound like an easy or enjoyable way to live, does it?
No, not at all. But you know what? It's the price you pay for the crime. You just don't really expect anything like this to happen.
Now, it's interesting because you start off talking about your story about how you got to be in this position of having to be in prison in the first place, and it reads and gives the feel of almost like that story Midnight Express. You were pretty much on the edge even in those days, huh?
Yeah, I lived on the edge for quite a while. I took a few wrong turns, and then before you know it, I stepped off the edge of the cliff, and there was nothing I could do but hold my breath and hope I didn't squat. Mm-hmm. Splash. The story is kind of a cautionary tale. A lot of people think that criminals make some singular decision, I'm going to be a criminal, I'm going to commit a crime, or they just grow up as, in some way that suggests that's where they're going to end up anyhow. In my case, and I think in a lot of cases, because I met a lot of women that were similar to me, there's no singular decision that, they made, I'll be a bad person, and they didn't come from the kind of backgrounds that would suggest that they might end up where they ended up. Mm-hmm. It's a series of silly mistakes, not serious ones, but when you add them all together, all of a sudden you're in a position where you've lost control. So I think what I hope is that when people read my tale, if there's anybody reading this and they're kind of in that moral gray space, mm-hmm. that they maybe take a closer look at where they might be putting themselves, what kind of jeopardy they might be putting themselves into.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to prison life and people watching Orange is the New Black, what would you say were some of the things that seemed relatively inaccurate as far as what they portray in this show versus the reality of what it's like to actually be in that lifestyle? if you want to call it a lifestyle, that is.
The show is pure fiction.
Right.
A lot of what they present is almost cliche, but those cliches exist, and they are cliche because they exist so prevalently. So a lot of the characters that they show you, especially the guards, and the behavior that exists between guards and inmates, and between guards and guards, and between inmates and inmates, is to some degree accurate, or in spirit is accurate. As far as the actual storyline goes, that is pure fiction.
So tell us what it is that everyday life is like when you're actually there for as long as you were.
It's different per individual, and it's pretty much up to the individual how they will do their time, or whether they will do their time or their time will do them. If you are a constructive person, and anybody who says I'm bored is going to have a really bad time in prison. They're going to be bored right out of their mind. Anybody who pretty much stays busy and engaged out here will do the same in there. And the thing that I did was I wrote 3 novels while I was in the pokey. I worked in the computer labs. I kept myself on a really busy, rigid schedule, and it made my time fly, and it gave my life purpose. And I think without purpose, you are in deep trouble. Mm-hmm. Without purpose, you're going to fall into some awful, awful nooks and crannies and cracks. The potential for violence is astounding. If you don't get along with somebody out here, you stay away from them. If you don't get along with somebody in there, you don't get away from them. And so where there might be tensions between people, they mount, and they mount, and they mount, and they grow out of proportion, and that, I think, is what breeds a lot of the violence that you see in prison. And then there's the overcrowding, which you have a limited number of resources. So when people are 30 deep,
Clary, are you still with us?
Height to start with go through the roof. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be said for keeping to yourself, having a program, whatever that means to you. And to me, it meant having something that I had to do literally every waking moment. Mm-hmm. No sitting around and sleeping, no idle hands, because those get you in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can imagine as people read your memoir, they'll realize you actually had a lot of travel and adventure, if you will, in your life, and to have your life come to a point where it became very routine daily, that must have taken some tremendous adjustment on your part.
It did. It took a lot of adjustment. It was such a weird thing because we had 7 years of pretrial, and in 7 years, I started to believe that it was never going to happen, that it just made no sense anymore. Because by the time I did get sentenced, it was almost 10 years since I'd been involved in anything. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe it's the human spirit. You just want to believe that the worst is not going to happen, and when it does, you're surprised. So it was a very quick and brutal adjustment from, I was working as a software test analyst in San Francisco, and in the busy .com days and startups, and making my way, and then put on the brakes, stop life all over again. And it's like a death. When I was arrested and extradited to California, that was like a tiny death. I left everything and everyone behind that I knew and couldn't go back to Vermont. So I started life over, and then in 2003, I had to do it again. I had to leave everyone and everything I knew behind again and go to the pokey for 6 years. And I had planned on going back to San Francisco, but life being what life is, things changed, and I couldn't go back to San Francisco. I had to go take care of my mother in Ohio. So once again, I had to leave everything and everyone I knew behind and start over. And so it's been a series of like stops and starts and stops and starts. And the 6 years in prison was like sitting still. It's the strangest place to be in. In one aspect, it feels like it's absolutely never going to end, that the clock is ticking by slower than molasses. And on the other hand, you look up and years have passed, and you're closer and closer to your release date. And on the one hand, it takes, forever to get through a week. And on the other hand, you have a visit from family members and they're aging before your very eyes because you only see them maybe once a year. It was a very odd place to be. And one of the things that I did is I did not have a lot of outside visitors. I was in California and my family was in Ohio. And that almost made it easier for me to just sort of shut down my connection to the outer world, to the free world, and just live kind of for the moment without thought towards, I don't know how to explain this, so I won't try. How about that? But it passed, and I got back to Cincinnati, and I went through the obstacles that everyone faces when you come out of prison. You have to go through the halfway house. It's a series of obstacles that are fairly substantial and fairly difficult, and a lot of people don't make it through that gamut. But I had gotten through that gamut, and was very close to the end of my probation when the series hit, and it was like a gut punch. I mean, of course, I was like, what a novelty. I'm going to be Laura Prepon is going to be playing me, and Donna from the 70s show is one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was a bit of a novelty, but a bit of an odd novelty. I was so frightened that, my house of cards, as I said, was falling. That, and when I finished watching the series, I looked. I did a search online at Google for my own name, and I had done this regularly since I got out, and since I got hired at a real job, which took me 2 years to get. I had searched my own name, trying to make sure that things were not coming up online that I didn't want other people to be looking at, and without fail, nothing ever came up, but literally the minute I stopped watching the series, my mugshot was up online. And the company who had that up it's sort of like an extortion scam. You pay to have your image and your information taken down from one server, and then it pops up on 3 more. And each time you pay for it, it gets more expensive. So I decided, I think maybe I better choose a different route. And I went into my boss's office that Monday morning, kind of expecting to be fired. And I told her what had happened, what I had watched over the weekend, and what I thought was about to ensue, and that I was fairly certain that she was probably going to have to let me go. And she just giggled and said, "We know about your past. You didn't lie to us. We're not going to fire you." And I cried. I burst into tears. It was, the most it was probably more liberating than the day I got released from prison, because I was released from my secrets. And that was a big, big shift in my life.
Well, I think what a lot of people don't understand who have never had the experience of maybe going to jail for a night, or whether it's for a weekend, or whether in your case it's actual prison for, several years, is that once you're done and you're out into the real world, that you have sort of that super skeleton in the closet, and you're really trying to turn your life around. And although you have actually paid the price of your crime, so to speak, according to the courts, it seems that once you're out there in public, you don't feel released from that bondage. Sort of like, why aren't you giving me that second chance? Yeah, I blew it here and I paid for my sin, but, on the other hand, I'm out here trying to turn things around and you're not making it any easier for me. So it's sort of like going back into prison, only you have freedom.
Right. It's like swimming with a ball and chain.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, how about your relationship? Now, the woman who actually wrote the story, or the screenplay, I guess, for The Orange is the New Black, you had a relationship with her. Were married, I understand?
No, we were never married. We were lovers.
Okay. See, I haven't really seen the series yet, so I'm trying to piece some things together, but, the approach I understand is the one, what it is like when you actually get a public record like that, and then you actually have to get out there and want to improve and do better in your life, and how it seems society doesn't want that to happen for you, like there's more for you to prove before you get to kind of be one of us again, so to speak.
You summed it up very well. And even when you have proven it, you can't. You have to keep proving it over and over and over again. I don't think it ever goes away.
Mm-hmm. Now, what has been the response as you put your memoir out there from people who are fans of the show?
I've had very good responses. I don't.
Your story's a lot of fun to read, actually, especially the adventurous stuff where you're going to Paris and Africa and and on, and you're like, wow, this person really got around and was kind of just living on the edge on the one hand, so you didn't really feel like what you were doing was criminal, even though it is, sort of like back in the Prohibition when they were selling, high-end liquor, he's a gangster. Well, the only reason he was a gangster is because he was supplying something that you decided to make against the law, which later on became legal. But other than that, he was a great guy.
Exactly. And that's so funny that you say that, because that whole concept, drugs being illegal is exactly like liquor being illegal. There was a time that none of them were illegal.
Right.
And I think we have more anarchy and crime and nonsense going on now than we did then.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a weird, the war on drugs has obviously not worked. I live in Ohio, and our heroin addiction is out of control. I hate that I ever had anything to do with that, because I don't think that alcohol and heroin are comparable. The addiction to heroin is almost as bad as cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's illegal and very expensive, and people ruin their lives over it.
It's such a fascinating memoir for people to read, because it really gives you an insider's view about, some of the decisions that you make, even though at the moment you could rationalize, well, this is a good thing. It was like what you were experiencing when you decided to go on your second trip back to Africa. You're realizing, well, I kind of spent all the money that I made for the first trip, but, on the other hand, I could be doing these and this and that and the other thing, and it's funny what you start doing once you take that step, that you're willing to do it again and rationalize that step, and I think we all do that.
We can rationalize until we're very deep in trouble, which is exactly what I did.
Mm-hmm. Now,
I was young and stupid.
Well, I think we all get that way from time to time, and sometimes there are just things that tangle us up, and you're thinking, well, I didn't realize that snare was out there for me, and then finally it is. But did you ever find, during the course of all this, the law ever being forgiving in any way?
No, federal law is very unforgiving. It's set up so that even the judges at the time I was sentenced, they still had sentencing guidelines and mandatory minimums, and the sentencing guidelines basically took all of the judges' discretion away, so they couldn't look at They couldn't look at any extenuating circumstances and make any determination that the sentence was formulaic. So if there was any potential for forgiveness, it was prohibited by the sentencing guidelines, which have since been ruled by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional, which I think is interesting. And I wish they would do the same with mandatory minimums, because that I think people should be aware of the length of terms that people are being given for first-time nonviolent drug offenses.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Clary, because I've done that on this program a couple of times where, America, first of all, incarcerates more than any place on planet Earth, and it's pretty alarming when you consider that. Even more alarming is, more than close to 70% of them are nonviolent crimes. These are people...
Right.
Now, even worse, and this has it's a fact, actually, it's not even hard to research, especially along the southern part of the United States, there were a tremendous amount of teens and young 20-something-year-olds that were being incarcerated minimum 2 years for minor drug possessions, marijuana, things like that, and it was discovered because they were starting to take these penal institutions and privatize them. And as a result, because they're getting the private as well as the government money, the judges were getting kickbacks on sending these kids to prison. As a result, because there's so much money they get per prisoner. And you're realizing, wait a minute, now they're starting to throw people in prison for profit. So a judge is on the take, which a couple of judges have actually been caught doing this, and of course they're not judges anymore, but you really start having to scratch your head, why are these institutions being privatized, which is the worst thing you can do because of the lack of control that's going to occur, and then, of course, how frequent you start seeing kids going in, getting records for some of the stupidest things that leave you just scratching your head like, what direction do we believe we're really thinking here? Where is that rationalization that makes you think what is happening here is reasonable?
Well, we're turning human beings into a commodity, and that is dangerous. When crime is profitable, there will be more crime. And if there aren't enough criminals, we'll just make new laws so we get more criminals. And that's scary. That's terrifying. And I don't, the thing that's really perplexing is that it's getting closer to home. We do have the largest population of people that have been incarcerated, or are still tied up in the American justice system, and that means that everybody knows somebody or is somebody that is embroiled in it. When are we going to wake up and go, oh, wait a minute, this is getting out of hand? I hope we wake up soon.
I do, too. Too many kids with records that shouldn't be having records. There's no doubt about that. What has been the biggest inspiration for people as they read your memoir here on this?
I'm hoping that the biggest inspiration is that anybody who's out there who has found themselves in the situation, either before or after being caught and going to jail, I hope that they can, find hope in the fact that I made it through, that mine was an unusually long journey. It's very unusual that it takes as many years to get from the beginning of this nightmare to the end of it. But the addition of 7 years of pretrial, which is the same as being on probation, just made this an incredibly long journey that really at times felt like it would absolutely never be over. And for people reading this that it does touch, I hope that what they see is that everything is temporary and that, obstacles can be gotten through. You can get through anything. And just hang on to your hope and hang on to your sense of self. Like, figure out what you want to be when you grow up and point yourself in that direction and don't stray from it.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. I think Andy Dufresne said pretty much the same thing in The Shawshank Redemption. Hope is a good thing.
Yeah, it is.
Now, Clary, is there a website people can find out more about how to get the book?
Yeah, there's a couple ways. You can go to facebook.com/outoforange or clearywolters.com or to the Harbor One website. And in each of those places, you'll find the book is sold just about everywhere. Books are sold.
Very good. Out of Orange, a Memoir is the book, and our guest joining us today, Clary Walters. I want to thank you for being on the program today, and I'm going to look forward to at least testing the series out and see what it's all about.
Okay. And the thing that's interesting is the differences between the series and the reality are pretty substantial. And I just finished watching season 3. Season 3 is pure fiction.
Yes, exactly. It's like the American game.
I'm alive. I think they killed me. And I can tell you I'm not dead.
Well, Clary, thank you for taking the time to be on the program today, and it sounds like things are doing well for you, and I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. It's nice talking to you. Good luck with your get your audience doing the right thing.
You better believe it. We try anyway.
Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Clary. Again, the book is Out of Orange, a Memoir. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. And sign up for our free weekly e-news updates. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well at Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.